How does it differ, taking a novel? I mean, what is the, I know it's shorter, a novel and a screenplay. It's the first thing and maybe the only thing I really know about it.
It's not just shorter. The pattern of a film is much more locked in. You're much more dealing with a sonnet-like restrictiveness. There are certain moments when the bomb has to go off, certain times when the revelation has to come. Not so much because people expect it that way, but because a film has a certain rhythm, a certain natural rhythm that you fall into almost without thinking. Plus, it's just simpler. You can't, there can't be too many shadowy motives. So right there, it can't be like real life where all our motives are shadowy. There can't be anything unclear. It's got to be really, usually from one person's point of view. So you lose so many lifelike elements. What you get in return, of course, is that enormous visual impact that is made not just by the fact that you're looking at it and it's beautiful and it's big, but by the movie stars and their iconic faces that just, you know, take over everything. An experience I had writing Shock to the System, I had terrible, terrible fights with the director over the character. I mean, just screaming, yelling, knockdown fights about what this character was and who he was. And then I saw the rushes and Michael Caine walked on screen and I thought, it didn't matter, it was just Michael Caine. You know, his face defined the character and his voice defined the character. And so much of it was just me giving him witty things to say and putting him in exciting situations because it was going to come down to people going, ah, Michael Caine.
Right. Well, and you brought up another point, which is so much of what happens in a book, if it isn't in dialogue, what, has to be changed to dialogue to make it work on the screen?
The information has to be conveyed through dialogue.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, the camera can pan around and sort of take care of the descriptive passages to some degree, but whatever action's happening more or less has to be
That's right.
Physical or conversation, doesn't it?
Right, right. There's no, I mean, you can do internal voices, voiceovers and things like that, but they aren't ultimately serving it, and you're just not, you don't have, I mean, I try my best to write books. Obviously, the genre that we work in, the crime genre, isn't entirely devoted to reality. The things that happen are sometimes bigger, sometimes stranger, sometimes scarier than real life. They're not more sensational than real life, but they just fall into place maybe a little better. That's fine. That's part of the fictional process, part of storytelling and myth making, and that's great. But I really try hard to put real people in those stories. I try very hard to have real moral choices and real emotions that people have experienced. So that when you're in a gunfight in one of my books, you're in a situation where even if you've never lifted a hand in anger, you might think, yeah, I know what that feeling is like. You just can't do that in film. There's just nothing like it in film because you're not inside the character. What you're seeing is visually so exciting that it carries you through. But it's not an experience, with very few exceptions, it's not an experience where you go back and you get into a situation in your own life and say, oh yeah, that's like the gunfight in Dynamite Road. That's like, you know, a scene that I read in this book or whatever.
Absolutely. Are you familiar with Marshall McLuhan and his whole
Sure.
thing about the medium as the
Sure.
message? I mean, I always think about that, you know, that reading is an interactive process
Yes.
and requires, you know, the reader, in fact, everybody's reading of a book is unique, right? Because
Sure.
each person brings his or her own emotions and experience and all the rest of
Yeah.
it. But viewing is much, it can be a group, whereas reading is solipsist, i.e. you have to be by
Absolutely.
yourself. Viewing is oftentimes a group activity.
Yeah.
There's a crowd dynamic, you know, people laugh, and you can get caught up in that.
Absolutely.
But it's also passive in the sense that you're sort of sitting back and you know, it's being shown to you. You're
Right.
not having to participate in it.
To make it, yeah, you make a book in your mind, and that's you know, a wonderful thing. People who know about reading, you know, understand that, and that's an experience they wouldn't trade for anything.
I'm often interested when people say, and most often they are, readers disappointed in the movie. And I often try to say to them, you know, but it's not the same, it could never have been the book.
I'm very easygoing about this, I have to say, and it drives a lot of my friends crazy. I'll go to the movie. I went and saw the Master and Commander, the Patrick O'Brian books. I love the Patrick O'Brian books. I think they're some of the best writing of the last part of the 20th century. I've read all 21 of them, I think it is. The movie is much different, much more shallow. The characters are kind of remanufactured, but I loved it. It was great. You know, it just wasn't the books. I mean,
not at all. I mean, you can't get those nuances with Aubrey and Maturin. You don't really get a sense that maybe the doctor was a spy and had a different agenda. And what you got were those big action scenes, and in fact, some of the time you couldn't actually tell who was fighting whom.
Who was fighting whom. But
it was easier in Pirates of the Caribbean to figure it out. You know?
Yeah. But you got a wonderful sense of how the people involved were very passionate about what they were doing, but the sea was so vast that it really didn't matter in the big picture. I liked the movie. And,
I did, and I thought it gave you a tremendous sense of, you know, what incredible bravery these people had, you know, sailing in these little bitty boats on those terrible, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've sailed around Cape Horn and in a typhoon, in a huge modern boat, and I was scared. So, I mean, I thought to myself, good Lord, you know, who these people are. Terrible food. They're never warm.
Right.
And, you know, one of the things that was just sort of touched on in the movie, and I'm not sure how much American viewers would really pick up on it, but how many of those people had been press ganged onto those ships. They were not there because they wanted to be sailors. They were there because they'd been kidnapped and forced into, you know, this awful life.
Absolutely.
Which for many of them, I'm sure, was a complete nightmare. And whatever. But you're right. It was. I thought my favorite example was my favorite example of the difference is The Name of the Rose. I remember when I read it, which I think is a very tough book. I often call it the great unread bestseller, because I think it was a book that really was too hard for most people to read, and a lot of people said they read it, but you know, but really didn't. And I thought to myself when I heard about the movie, I thought, no way.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, and then when I saw the movie, of course it was Sean Connery. I mean, you know, like you were talking about Michael Caine. But what they chose to do, it had a total life of its own.
Right.
So, I mean, there was the book, there was the film, and they both worked, but they were really so different.
Right, and that was the way I felt about Don't Say a Word. In the end, I just thought this film works. It's exciting, it's stylish,
and they're different.
And it's different. And Brittany Murphy was wonderful, saying, you know, I'll never tell, which was kind of became a catchword for a couple of weeks, and that was kind of fun too.
And as you pointed out, there's good money.
And the money's good. I never object to the money. That's right. I mean, the money means you are free.
Absolutely. Sarah Paretsky and I had this chat recently on this very program because, you know, her film did not go down to any kind of critical acclaim, but Sarah points out that it allowed her to retire from insurance and do some things. And so, however brutal it was, you know.
You know, this comes into play with Dynamite Road. I mean, I wrote this book, which has a character in it. One of the main characters, Jim Bishop, who is a very hard-boiled character, a guy who kind of does a throwback to the Mike Hammers and the Dirty Harrys and all this stuff. And I knew I was going to have problems with it with the publishers, and I did. And the fact that I've had a fun career and a good career, and the movies have supported me and backed me up, made it possible for me to be the ornery cuss I've always been anyway, you know.
Not you, Andrew.
No, I know. A charming ornery. But yeah, I mean, that's what it does. It gives you the freedom to get your characters before the public and not the softened characters that somebody else wants.
Not to mention you can do this full time.
Yes,
which is very nice
exciting,
also.
and I love what I do, so that is great. Yeah.
Yes, you do, and in fact, it's an interesting point you make about Dirty Harry, because when we got to that, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if this is a book, you know, that Eastwood again might be interested in, because it really does have that element in it.
It does, and you know, obviously, I mean, that's one of the reasons I was thrilled to have Eastwood involved in any of my things. But you know, I think that. It's going to be interesting to see if this makes it to the screen. If this one or the sequel, which is all, you know, the sequel's already done, it'd be interesting to see if one of them makes it to the screen, because it is very hard-boiled stuff. And at the same time, I think it's a big action story and could make a good film. I'll be interested to watch its development and see what happens to it on the way.
Speaking of sequel, isn't that kind of a departure for you?
Big departure, yeah. I mean,
in fact, have you written a sequel to anything?
No,
I didn't think so.
And I was dead set against it. I never thought I'd do it. I very much thought of myself as a singleton writer, as they say in England, a writer of one-offs. And I mean, my wife complains that I'll never take the same walk twice, you know, so I get very bored very quickly. And I didn't think I was going to do it. But one of the things that happened was I began to feel that I had done with thrillers and a lot of what I wanted to do. I mean, I had written different kinds of thrillers. I had tried to push both myself and the genre as far as I could. And I felt that I had run out. I had played the string out in a certain way.